7 months ago, I went to Namibia for a neurology training course called RTC-15. And I spent time in Windhoek. And during that time, I studied a lot about Namibia's culture and history. And I got to find out something quite interesting about why it has that small extension at the top. So, why is Namibia shaped like a frying pan with a panhandle? First, let me confirm to you that panhandle is actually the technical term in cartography. So, to explain, just like any other stories concerning the quirks of African maps, it all begins with the colonial period. Colonialists used to control vast lands of Africa after the Berlin Conference, and Germany controlled German East Africa, which included Tanganyika and Zanzibar, and in Southern Africa, Namibia, which still has a lot of German descent people to this date. And that colonial chapter in Namibia was a very brutal one. I'll talk about that later, but not today. Meanwhile, Britain controlled East Africa with its East African Protectorate territories, including Kenya and Uganda. While in Southern Africa, Britain controlled vast lands, including Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. So, in the 1890s, Britain and Germany were still kind of friendly to each other. They came to hate each other a lot later. So they made a treaty with each other to swap lands here and there. That treaty was called Heligoland Zanzibar Treaty, whereby Britain gave Germany an island in the North Sea called Heligoland, while Germany gave Britain Zanzibar. But Germany felt like Zanzibar was just too much of a big price compared to Heligoland, so they felt shortchanged. So they wanted something extra. They suggested to the British to carve them a narrow strip of land from Zambia and Botswana to allow Namibia to access the Zambezi River, something which they thought they could use to navigate to the Indian Ocean to get from Namibia to German East Africa, which was Tanganyika, easily. The British quickly agreed because they knew that they were agreeing to a useless proposition. Why? Because the British knew that the Zambezi River is not navigable by ships. Why? Because of the Victoria Falls, which are huge falls that make the river non-navigable. But the Germans did not know that. They were given that narrow strip of land to access the Zambezi River, and they called it Caprivi Strip, after their chancellor, who was called Caprivi at the time. The deal was signed, the ink dried, and Zanzibar belonged to the British, Caprivi Strip belonged to the Germans, and Heligoland Island in the North Sea belonged to the Germans. Done and dusted. And that is the last time the Germans and the British were friendly to each other, because from there on, it was all war. So now we come to World War I, which makes things quite interesting. So Germans have their Heligoland, which is minorly important to them. They have their Caprivi Strip, which is very useless to them. And the British have the Zanzibar Island, which is awesomely powerful to have. So the British, while fighting the Germans in World War I, used the Zanzibar Island as a staging post to invade the Greater Tanganyika, which was German East African territory. And they ended up succeeding and evicting Germans out of Tanganyika and converting Tanganyika from a German colony to a British colony. So this deal ended up benefiting Britain a lot, while not benefiting Germany at all. But that is all in the past during the colonial periods. Today, we are left with the legacy of that colonialism by having this narrow strip of land on top of Namibia, which was called Caprivi Strip, but today is called the Zambezi region of Namibia. So, how is that important to Namibia today? So it is very important tourism-wise, because Namibia is a very dry country. It's one of the driest countries in the continent. In fact, it is the driest country south of Sahara. But now, this panhandle gives them one of their lushest and rainiest regions of Namibia, because this province, called the Zambezi region of Namibia, has a lot of wetlands, a lot of wildlife, a lot of sanctuaries, and a lot of resorts. And it is one of the most beautiful places in Namibia. But as they say, all that glitters is not gold. So besides that, it has led to a lot of cultural isolation of the people living there from other members of the Namibia community, because that strip of land is very far away from the mainland Namibia, and thus is causing cultural incongruity between them and the Namibians. The people who live in the Zambezi region of Namibia, or the panhandle of Namibia, have more in common with the Botswanans or the Zambians. They are being isolated from the neighboring communities that are similar to them by being placed in two different nations. That is a bad legacy of colonialism that can even be seen here in Kenya, where some communities have been split into two by colonial boundaries, whereas there used to be one community, like the Maasais, the Somalis, or the Sabaots, being split between Kenya and Tanzania, Kenya and Somalia, and Kenya and Uganda, respectively. Now you know about this history of why the Namibian Panhandle came to be. Thank you.